Hey, what's going on, guys? Today we're going to be covering all of the special amulets in Lies of P. Now, if you don't know what the special amulets are and how they differ from regular ones, these are the ones that you specifically get off the boss merchant, of which when you trade in your boss ogre, you can get either a weapon or an amulet. Now, these special amulets tend to have much more different types of effects compared to regular amulets, to the point where they're probably a lot more useful. However, they do weigh a lot more. The average amulet weighs about 2 to 3 units, whereas the average special amulet can weigh anywhere between 10 to 20 units. Now, all of these amulets we're going to be covering today, going to be showing you guys exactly how they work, whether or not they're actually good, and we're going to go ahead and rank them as well, because why not? It's fun. Now, the criteria for this is obviously based on how well they actually do perform, and we are going to compare them to their weapon counterparts to see which one is actually worth getting over the other. Now, one thing I do want to let you guys know is that the numbers of which I actually have throughout my testing is obviously not going to be definitive, because trying to test out damage numbers in this game is so annoying, because everything is just RNG based damage. You can never get a consistent number. So I can't really have a definitive type of percentage for all of these buffs. So do take it with a grain of salt, but I did try to test it out as thorough as possible. But with that out of the way, let's just get started. Starting off at number 10, we have the Impregnable Fortress Amulet. Now, this amulet does give you the ability to not lose any weapon durability while you are blocking, which I guess is kind of cool, but it's definitely not worth the amulet slots, nor is it worth the 10 weight units that does come with as well. Because weapon durability is easy to counteract, because one, you do have a grinder that's easily accessible, and there are plenty of perks via the P organ that can actually help this out as well. And this amulet is actually acquired off Luxarcia's Ergo, which is obviously towards the end of the game, and you're better off just going with the Ouroboros' Eye, which is an amazing weapon, gets really good moveset and a very high damage as well. Now, coming in at number 9, we have the Dancing One's Amulet. Now, this amulet does actually allow you to dodge when you have negative stamina. So when your stamina bar is completely depleted, you actually can still dodge infinitely. Now, this obviously means that you have to go into negative stamina. So if you keep dodging forever, basically it's going to take a while for you to get that stamina back. But basically, this is meant for the people that have very poor stamina management, to where they keep attacking and then all of a sudden they have no stamina left to dodge an attack. This is kind of meant for those people. Or if you're fighting an enemy that does do a lot of that shock status effect as well, because obviously that shock status effect does decrease your stamina regeneration dramatically. So there's going to be plenty of times when you're fighting those enemies and your period is always going to be in negative stamina. So it might be good for those as well, but it's a very niche use. And the fact that this thing does consume 20 whole weight as well, I wouldn't really recommend using it. I was just trying to practice your stamina management, because it's very important, instead of having to rely on something like this. But the reason why it's not going to get at the bottom is because you can get it very early on. It's acquired off trading in the Parade Master's Ogre, which is the first boss in the game. And the alternative is the 7-coil Spring Sword, which is a very average motivity based weapon. So honestly, I'll just pick up this amulet and probably use it against enemies that do a lot of shock. Number 8, we have the Triumvirate Amulet. Now, this amulet does actually boost the scalings of all of your Legion arms. So when you have it equipped, it will just boost it by 1 whole tier. So for instance, if you had the Falcon Eyes equipped, which gets a C scaling in motivity and an A scaling in technique, once you equip the amulet, you'll get a B scaling in motivity and an S scaling in technique. So this amulet could be imperative to Legion arm types of builds. However, they don't really exist because Legion arms don't really have too many casts, so you're not going to really have it as a primary based option. So inherently, it's just going to end up being a niche type of amulet. And the fact that it only increases your scalings by 1 tier isn't going to result in too much more damage. But the way you could actually use this amulet is just equip it at the start of the boss fight, just spam your entire Legion arm right at the beginning, and then you could just switch off the amulet. But another reason why this is going to get lower on the list is because the same boss ogre can actually be used to buy the Puppet Ripper weapon, which is an amazing weapon that gets a really solid moveset, really good damage with its Fable Art, and it gets amazing rage with those heavy attacks. So after you kill the boss at the end of Area 6, I'll just much rather go with that type of weapon instead of the amulet. But if you weren't going to go with that technique type of build, or if you already had a set weapon in mind, then I would just pick up the amulet. At number 7, we have the Nameless One's Amulet. Now, this amulet does actually grant the chance of not actually consuming any pulse cells when one is actually being used. Now, I did test this out hundreds of times, and the number that I ended up getting was about roughly 1 in 5. So it is like a 20% chance of you actually using your pulse cell and it's actually not being consumed at all, which is pretty decent, but it's obviously going to be a lot more useful when you have a higher number of pulse cells. I was using it a whole bunch when I had 11 cells in total, and there were times where I didn't get a single one back, but there was a time where I actually ended up getting 5 back. So with how just random it actually is, I wouldn't really recommend it. But if you had closer towards 10 flasks and you probably could free up an amulet slot, I could put this on for a boss fight, because in most cases, I ended up getting about 2 or 3 flasks back, which if you just look at this amulet as something that just gives you 2 more flasks, it's definitely worth it. But obviously, being at how random it actually is, and sometimes you can get none, it could just be useless having it on, and it does actually take up 10 weight units as well. But the worst part about this is that the weapon alternative is the Trident of the Covenant, which is probably one of the best weapons in the entire game. This thing has an amazing moveset, does really good damage, insane range and reach with its attacks, and its skill is amazing as well. So after you clear out the boss in area 4, then I'd probably end up leaning towards that, but if you weren't going to go with a technique type of build or you already had a weapon in mind, then definitely just pick up the Nameless One's amulet. Number 6, we have the Ghost Walk Amulet. Now, this amulet actually gives you the ability to dodge Fury attacks. Now, if you don't know what a Fury attack is, it's basically those attacks that light up red that you can normally only deflect. Now, this is amazing because Fury attacks are just some of the most bullshit attacks in the entire game because they're extremely delayed, they're just not telegraphed at all, and they just require a lot of memorization. So the way to actually use this amulet is to just have it equipped and to actually memorize the boss's attack patterns, because it's obviously a lot easier to dodge an attack than it is to deflect. And once you're actually comfortable with the timings of these Fury attacks, then you can just switch it off and actually just start to deflect. Now, there are a few reasons as to why this is not going to get higher on the list, and honestly, probably should actually end up getting lower on the list. And that's one, you don't really benefit off dodging at all. You're always going to benefit more off deflecting something. Two, this thing actually weighs 22 units, which is just actually ridiculous. You're going to have to take off a bunch of your defenses just to actually equip this one amulet. And the last annoying thing is that the weapon alternative is the Twin Dragon Katana, which is one of the best weapons in the entire game and probably the most fun weapon to use. It's extremely cool. Definitely recommend using it if you haven't already. But once again, if you're not going to go with a technique type of build, or if you already have a specific weapon in mind, then I would just recommend picking up the Ghost Walk Amulet, because you do benefit a lot, especially with those later game bosses that have a lot of those Fury attacks that are very delayed, that are hard to read. Just using that dodge itself would actually just get you more accustomed to it. And then once you actually end up getting comfortable, then you can switch it off. At number 5, we have the Extreme Modification Amulet. Now, this amulet does actually boost your weapon attack damage with every single Fable slot you actually have charged. Now, from my testing, this ended up being about 5% more damage with every single Fable charge. Now, obviously, it could be wrong because it's very hard to test out things in this game. But from what I gathered, it ended up being about 5% more damage. Now, this actually is pretty decent because for most people, they only have about 3 to 4 charge slots. That's about 15 to 20% more damage, which is really nice to have. However, the way to do meaningful damage in this game is probably to be spamming your Fable charges over and over again, whatever Fable arts that you have. Just constantly using those is definitely going to be the best way to just do really good damage. But if you're a person that, for whatever reason, just doesn't like to use it or just doesn't really use it that often, then having this amulet could actually be really good. And the weapon alternative, or what you do get off the boss Ogo, is the Etiquette weapon, which honestly is not that good of a technique-based weapon. There are much better options out there, like the Trident and the Katana. So I just recommend picking up this amulet, and if you're a person that doesn't really use your Fable arts much, just throw on this amulet, you'll benefit greatly. And if you end up speccing into more Fable charges via your P organ, you can end up getting about 25% more damage just passively by having it equipped, which is amazing. Number 4, we have the Piercing Hatred Amulet. Now, this amulet does actually make you immune to all attribute status elements. So this includes all the status effects except for Break, Disruption, and Shock. So being able to be immune against Corruption, Decay, Overheat, and Electric Shock is just fucking amazing. There are so many enemies that just do status effects in this game that it's incredibly obnoxious. So having this as an amulet is just an absolute godsend. However, this is acquired off the final boss in the game, and the weapon alternative that we do get is actually pretty decent as well. But there are better weapon options out there. So honestly, I would just pick up the amulet and just go through New Game Plus, and your experience will be a lot more smooth for the most part, because enemies in New Game Plus still do like ridiculous amounts of damage compared to regular New Game. But just throwing on this amulet and just going through a bunch of poison swamps and not having to worry about any type of status effects like Decay as well, especially Decay because I hate that one, it's just amazing. Number 3, we have the Awakened Gods Amulet. Now, this amulet does actually boost the damage of your Fable arts against an enemy that is actually staggered. So when the enemy is in a state of when they normally can get fatal attacked, you would just use your Fable arts instead and end up doing roughly about 15 to 20% more damage from what my testing actually was, which is actually a pretty decent number. So instead of actually going for the fatal attack, you actually can go with the Fable attack and end up doing a lot more damage that way. But the obvious way to use it would be to stagger their enemy, use your Fable art, and then end up getting the fatal attack. Obviously, some bosses won't actually allow this to happen. In that instance, I'd probably just rather go for the fatal attack, and then while they're recovering, being that in most situations when you get a fatal attack, they do this recovery animation, then you can actually charge up your Fable art and end up doing damage that way. So this amulet probably doesn't have a use for against every single type of enemy and every single type of boss, but the fact that against most bosses you probably could just end up doing 20% more damage with your fatal art is just amazing. Now, unfortunately, it is actually acquired towards the end of the game of the second to last boss, which is unfortunate, but fortunately, The weapon alternative is actually going to be the Noblesse Oblige, which honestly is not that great. I would just recommend going with the Awakened God's Amulet every single time. Unless you did have a motivity-based build and you wanted a new type of weapon, this one actually is not the worst thing in the world. Like, it does have some cool heavy attacks, although I don't really care much for the Fable art at all, or the light attack combo. But the Awakened God's Amulet is definitely really good. Number 2, we have the Arm of God Amulet. Now, this amulet does actually boost your physical damage every single time that you land an attack. Now, from my testing, ended up being about 3 to 4% more damage with every single hit that you land, and it stacks up to 4 times, and the buff itself lasts 5 seconds. So basically, if you're a person that's pretty aggressive, or if you're using a quicker weapon, you're almost always going to have a 15% buff just all the time, which I don't know about you guys, but 15% more damage is definitely really good. Now, the obvious downsides is that yes, it does only last 5 seconds, and against enemies that barely give you any long openings, it's not going to be that beneficial. Or if you're using a slower base weapon that can't really hit multiple times very quickly, it's not going to be that useful. But the fact that you can just benefit off this in almost every single instance, because all you got to do is just do damage, and then you can just get even more damage out of it. Now, the weapon alternative is actually the Frozen Feast, which honestly, as a weapon itself, not too big of a fan. It is very slow. It actually does increase in speed once you actually get more attacks out of it, or if you use its Fable art. But this weapon is actually acquired to do an NPC questline if you want to get like one of the secret hidden endings. But honestly, in my opinion, just like leave that for New Game Plus. Just go for like the regular ending your first playthrough. Just pick up the regular Arm of God Amulet, because you're just going to benefit almost every single time. At number 1, we have the Conquering Amulet. Now, this amulet, when equipped, does actually boost the damage after you deflect something or get a perfect guard. And this damage increases about 20 whole percent. Now, you do only have about 5 seconds to get this off, but with how often you should be deflecting in this game, you're basically always going to have this buff active, and the meta is basically spamming a whole bunch of charged heavy attacks and Fable arts, and once you do that, extra 20% more damage is just amazing to have. Now, yes, this might be a higher skill based of amulets because it is going to require a lot of deflecting, but honestly, this game is going to have to require you to just do a lot of deflecting. You're going to have to get good and learn how to deflect, and when you do, definitely recommend putting on this bad boy, because once you do, you're pretty much never going to take it off, because you're just going to have it on, you deflect something, you'll spam your charged heavy attack, and notice you'll be doing a bunch more damage, and it's really nice to have. Now, this amulet definitely pairs well with things that have guard parry, or even the twin dragon katana as well. When you get that heavy attack deflect, end up doing a lot more damage than that next attack. Basically, pairing it alongside this amulet right here is definitely going to be the play. Now, the weapon alternative is the Holy Sword of Arc. Now, this sword itself is actually pretty slow, but when you actually transform it with its Fable art, actually does extend the range and actually gives it a pretty quick moveset as well, which honestly I prefer a whole bunch more, and actually ends up being one of the better motivity weapons in the game when this thing actually is transformed. But once again, if you already had another weapon in mind, or you're not going with a motivity type of build, I would just recommend picking up the Conqueror's Amulet. Even if you were going to go with a motivity build, pick up the Conquering Amulet. It's just amazing. But yeah, that pretty much concludes it for the video. Hopefully you guys learned something. If I did miss anything, just let me know down in the comments. As always, please do like and subscribe, because I will have some more Lies of P videos coming along the way. Just let me know down in the comments if you actually wanted to see something in particular. And definitely do follow me on Twitch as well, because I am live there every single day. Anyway, see you guys in the next one. Bye.